name is Jamie LaForge, Director of Demand Gen here at Corporate Visions, and I'll be moderating today's event. Before we get started, though, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so we can make today's event as interactive as we can for everybody. You've joined the presentation using your computer speakers by default. If you prefer to join over your phone, just select the telephone button in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll also have the opportunity to submit text questions to our presenters today by typing your questions into the questions pane on the control panel. Feel free to send in your questions at any time during today's event. We will collect these and answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Also, as a reminder, following the event, we'll be sending all attendees a recording of today's webinar along with the slide deck. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Here to kick off the content is Tim Reister, Chief Strategy Officer for Corporate Visions and one of our authors of our just released book, The Expansion Sale. Tim, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jamie. Good to be here with everybody today, and we're excited about the new book, and we want to share some of the contents with you. Hopefully you're as interested and as excited as we are in this area called the expansion sale. I'm joined by Dr. Nick Lee, and he is our research partner. His role in everything you're going to hear today is performing the studies and helping us understand the results of the studies in the context of his area of work. So he's a professor in marketing and sales, but he's a guy who knits together, if you will, cognitive neuroscience, social psychology, behavioral economics, philosophy, and brings that all to bear on how customers make decisions and how marketing and salespeople can address customers knowing that. So Nick, it's good to have you here. Appreciate your collaboration on the research and on this book, and thanks for joining me all the way from outside of London, England. Good to have you. So the thing that to start us off, shameless plug here, just to be honest, is that for the third week in a row, this book is now the #1 new Amazon release in the three areas, business sales, business marketing, and customer relations. And it's important, I think, that you see that sales, marketing, and customer relations, or like I like to think of as CSM, the big customer success movement here. There's a reason I think it's #1 in all three, is because this idea of the expansion sale, marketing to customers, is extremely important to all of the groups. And the content we're going to share with you today is important if you are in marketing, building customer marketing messages and campaigns. It's important to you in sales and account management if you are looking to renew and expand existing customers. And customer success, your job all day long is to be part of the customer dialogue and contribute to your company's ability to hit your expansion number. So we're excited to have all of you with us here today. The thing I want to tell you first is that context matters. This is where the book comes from, is this idea that there's a difference. There's a difference between the customer acquisition message and the customer expansion message. If you will, the prospect new business sale and the customer expansion renewal sale. In fact, what we've identified is that that difference isn't subtle. It's like 180 degrees opposite. And so the entire reason the expansion sale could be written is the uncovering through the research we did with Dr. Nick is this idea that there's a major difference. The underlying science here, the principle that's at work, is this idea that people live in status quo bias. And when you are trying to acquire a new customer, you are not their status quo bias. Somebody else is. So your job is to go in and disrupt, defeat, otherwise tear down their status quo bias in order to introduce your solution as an alternative. But scientifically speaking, psychologically speaking, and now through testing with would-be business-to-business buyers, we can tell you that you need to take the exact opposite approach with existing customers. That in fact, when you are trying to renew a customer, when you are trying to upsell a customer, when you are trying to migrate a customer, when you're trying to get a price increase with an existing customer, when you're trying to apologize for a service problem with an existing customer, it is 180 degrees different. You are reinforcing, you are building up, You are defending, you are expanding, and it's completely different than when you are disrupting and defeating and, if you will, unhinging their status quo bias. When you are the status quo bias, you need to take a different approach. It sounds really obvious to say it like that, and I don't want to be pedantic about it, but what we've discovered is that, unfortunately, in the majority of companies we talk to, they're taking the same approach in terms of how they message from marketing standpoint and how they run sales process from a sales standpoint, whether they're a prospect or a customer. And what we're going to show you is that the times that you're using that same approach with an existing customer, the one that you used to get them in the first place, could have the exact opposite effect. It could literally backfire. So let's talk about that difference. So here's what's going on, and these questions are not rocket science, but it is interesting to see them in contrast. A prospect who is not doing business with you has to answer the question, why should I change? Why should I do something different? Why should I do that now? Why can't I wait? Why can't I work on these other priorities? Why should this move up the list? Why should I do it with you? There's a lot of other alternatives, including my current incumbent. And why should I pay what you're asking me? Contrast that now to the existing customer. They're asking themselves, why should I stay with you? Why should I keep on keeping on? They're not asking the question, why should I change when they talk to you? When they're talking to you, they're saying, why should I stick with you? Why should I do more with you? Why should I continue to evolve? Why should I buy that upgrade, buy that adjacent service, buy that migrated cloud version of what you're selling? Why should I pay more? This is kind of interesting because at some point you may be, in order to win the business, you discounted it, and now you want to get some of that margin back. And then why should I forgive you when you've got a problem, your product fails, your solution, your service goes awry? Why should I continue to work with you and be confident in our relationship? As you can see, the 4 moments of the customer expansion, the expansion sale, are completely different than the 4 moments of the acquisition sale. I would argue they are 180 degrees different, and you see that in the psychology of the customer, the buyer. Their frame of mind is completely different. In one case, you got to disrupt and defeat, and the other you have to reinforce, because you're not status quo bias over here. You are status quo bias over here. Don't disrupt and defeat yourself. And that means your stories, your campaigns, your messages have to be different, and the skills with which you tell those stories need to be different. In one case, you have to be the disruptor when you're talking to a new logo, but you have to be the defender when you're talking to an existing customer and want to move them in a certain direction. And those are fundamentally different selling motions. So different psychology that you're dealing with in the customer, different stories, messages, and campaigns and content, and different skills in your approach, presentation, and conversations. So what we're going to do is help you understand initially this concept of status quo bias, because you need to understand why it's so contrasty between defeating it and, as we'll talk in a little bit, reinforcing it. When you're trying to defeat status quo bias, when you're talking to a new logo, you're trying to convince them that they should leave their current preferences. But human beings want to keep their current preferences stable. They hate instability. You're trying to convince them that there's a huge upside benefit to the change and not this big cost of change. In fact, you want to show them there's a cost to staying the same. You want to be able to show the clear contrasting difference, because to them, they're stuck in status quo bias because they believe everything's the same. So they want to keep it stable. They think the status quo is free and that they're dealing with a cost when it comes to you. So they want to keep it stable. They think what they're doing is now free and everybody looks essentially the same. And anticipated regret and blame. What they realize is maybe things aren't perfect, but they're not dead yet. The idea with making a change is that change is hard, change is risky, and that could kill you. You know, maybe what you're doing today isn't perfect, but you're not dead yet. That change to try something different and new is not guaranteed. And so as a result, you have to deliberately create uncertainty, destabilize their current preferences, You must show them there's a cost of staying the same to overcome this idea that the status quo is free. You must show clear contrast between what they're doing today and what you want them to do tomorrow, because the value is in the perceived contrast between today and tomorrow. And you want to tell a good before and a good after proof story. Help them overcome their anticipated regret and blame. For the last nearly 10 years, we've been going to the market, and a lot of other companies have gone to the market with a framework for disrupting people's status quo and defeating people's status quo. We call it the why change framework. Some people call it provocation-based selling. Some people call it challenging. Call it whatever you will, but the idea is you have to do something to destabilize their current preferences. Basically, introduce unconsidered needs, problems or opportunities they didn't even know they had. You have to show them a cost of staying the same that is greater than the cost of change, which requires you to show them that what they're doing today isn't maybe going to get them where they want to go. You must then show clear contrast between what they're doing today and what you believe is the new, better, improved approach that you can bring to the table. And then you must be able to tell them proof stories to help them overcome their anticipated regret and blame. So there's a very strong method to the madness. A good why change story to sort of defeat the status quo bias and win a new logo is structured very deliberately to overcome the 4 causes of status quo bias. Now, here's the hypothesis we went into this with when companies came to us and said, hey, is that the same when you talk to existing customers and you're doing renewals? Because here's what we're seeing in the market is renewals are all the rage because recurring revenue is all the rage. And everybody's now selling contracted relationships where instead of taking the money up front, it's like comes to you over the course of years, and maybe not even in the first contract, like the real profitable contract is the second contract. So almost every company we talk to anymore is trying to move whatever they do to some form of service and some sort of multi-year contracted agreement. And people said, should we be using this same approach? This one that you just talked about here, is that the approach we should use when we go into a renewal? Should we lead with all the new and all the exciting and all the different? And we said, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's possible, and I'm going to switch colors for us here. Maybe it's possible here that instead of defeating status quo bias, you should reinforce status quo bias. Now, mind you, we didn't know yet. We were guessing. We said, maybe, just maybe, you want to reinforce preference stability, not just destabilize them, because guess what? You are the preference. Maybe you want to lean into this idea that change costs a lot of money. Why? Because you are installed and you want to show that you're kind of operating in a friction-free environment. And so maybe you want to reinforce that cost of change idea. Maybe you want to reinforce selection difficulty. This one's interesting because everybody wants to hype their differentiation. Maybe, just maybe, you don't want to show as much daylight between you and the competition, because if what they're doing with you is here and their perception of what they're doing with someone else is there, nobody changes to get more or less the same. It's too risky to take on change if you're gonna get more or less the same. So maybe you want to show, hey, we've got you covered, we got your back, there's nothing out there we don't have, and it's all good here. And maybe, just maybe, you want to lean into this anticipated regret and blame. So Nick, I'm going to bring you in here because this is a distinctly different approach, and status quo bias is at the center of it. And I thought maybe from your perspective as a neuroscientist, social psychologist, maybe you could shed light on the research behind status quo bias that's been going on for like 40 years.
Thanks, Tim. It's so great to be here. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
We got you.
Awesome, thank you. I mean, it's fascinating to work with Tim on this, because status quo bias is one of those things that it's probably one of the most powerful evolved mechanisms we have. And I think one of the things we forget about, especially within business, in my experience anyway, is we talk about fancy things like neuroscience and cognitive psychology, but we don't talk enough about the evolved mechanisms that drive our behavior. Because when you think about it, the world that we live in today, business, society, Twitter, for example, it's really a thin veneer over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution of the species. And I think it's very important we realize that we can't really get away from the things that we're evolved to behave like. So I always look at status quo bias in the same way I look at something called risk aversion. And you might have come across risk aversion if you ever read a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And he won a Nobel Prize for work around this idea of risk aversion. And the idea is that we feel the pain of losses much more than we feel the pleasure of gains of the same amount. And that makes total sense when you think about where we come from as a species. Now, we tend to think about gains and losses today as finance. How much money do we make? Do we make a sale? Do we not make a sale? Do we fail? Do we succeed? But if you think about it, not that long ago in terms of history, human evolution, risk was really survival. And you think about it, I always look at this issue of status quo biases. I imagine myself living in a cave, and I think to myself, if I hear a noise outside the cave, it could be some food, or it could be something that wants to make me food. And then you think, what's the worst that can happen in both my decisions? So my decision to go outside and have a look, or to stay in the cave. Worst case scenario of staying in the cave is I miss out on a potential meal. Worst case scenario if I go outside is that I become a potential meal. So it actually makes sense that we're risk averse. And it therefore makes sense that we tend to be biased towards the situation we're in now. And that's really where I look at this idea of how we're looking at this kind of reinforcing why should we stay with the known safe option. You're really playing to a mechanism which is almost impossible to change. And when you are that safe option, it does seem crazy not to try to reinforce that.
It does, but it wasn't obvious to us. So I think we should have checked with you, Nick, beforehand. But you let us go through with these studies anyways. It was funny. I think we all had bought into the hype cycle around provocation, challenging, surprising insights, because we were having success with it too. We were helping clients build these messages, and they were unsticking stalled deals. They were creating more opportunities. They were winning new logos. And it's like, this stuff works. And so when we were asked the question, there was a moment like, and so I will tell you, spoiler alert, people, there wouldn't be an expansion sale book if the idea of reinforcing status quo bias hadn't turned out to be true. And the least surprised person in the room was Nick, because I think the words were, all you did was prove 40 years of status quo bias research is right. So I'm like, that's sort of a bubble popping right there. But for marketing and sales who had bought into the hype cycle around all this stuff, it was worth the research and talking about. So let me sort of visually show you how we hypothesized this idea of reinforcing, and now you'll understand like sort of the messaging frameworks and everything we're about to share. What we said is it makes sense that once you've scored a deal, and now you've got a relationship that's gone over time, that there's got to be some form of impact or results or outcomes or experiences that you and your customer have had together. And that's got to be worth something. There's also been investment and effort, right? So there was time that everybody put into this. There was money that everybody put into it. There was sweat equity. That's sweat on that guy's head. So there's a lot of investment, a lot of effort. You onboarded people, you changed your processes, your systems had to be integrated, like lexicon and nomenclature had to be adjusted to. So there's a lot of current impact and progress that was made at this time of potential renewal and a lot of sunk cost in terms of time, money, and effort. So our premise was, this is an incumbent advantage. This is something that is distinctly yours that competitors who are coming in to try and poach your business don't have. Yet as much as we could, as far as we could look, when we examined renewal pitches and customer marketing campaigns, we saw none of this content documented, memorialized, or otherwise included in it. In fact, what we saw was pitches that sounded a lot like what your competitors could bring to the table. At the time of renewal, people were leading with, and in customer marketing campaigns for upsells and migrations and everything else, people were leading with these new exciting needs, these surprising, unconsidered needs, these insightful, challenging, provocative needs, and promising some potential upside and value that the customer had been missing. And so this was the why change story, and your competitors were launching why change stories at you. But what we were seeing is the incumbents were using the same model, and guess what unwittingly happened? Literally all of you were fighting over new needs, the exciting new capabilities, and we're fighting over this little patch here, completely ignoring the thing that you had, your point of differentiation, which was the incumbent advantage. Progress that had been made to date, investment and effort that had been made, sunk, and don't have to be remade. So what we wanted to do is we said, hypothetically, if you're selling against a competitor who's coming in with a why change story, what you want to do is take advantage of your incumbent advantage. You want to reinforce these good things and all this progress that had been made. And you want to highlight that there's more of a likelihood of gaining future impact, not just potential impact, if you continue on this course and keep doing some of the things that we're telling you to do, whether it's renew with these upgraded features, or renew and buy these ancillary add-on things to accomplish even greater outcomes. Because what you were trying to do is create a firewall or a moat around your relationship. You wanted that your customer to see the competitors, maybe interesting story, we'll give them that, but as introducing a bunch of potential risk, that they could lose the progress they had made. They might have to redo all that investment and effort, and their risk of not getting the upside in all this is high. So you wanted to help them see and literally remind and reinforce for them what that risk might be of making change, because you've got the incumbent advantage. So back to these bubbles. So what we did then is say, listen, there are different moments. So the first moment was the moment of renewal, because everybody who was coming to us said, let's talk about that. What should that pitch look like? And we said, that's great, that's important, because the moment of renewal and the moment of upsell and the moment of price increases is literally responsible for 70 to 80% of your revenue. I stood in front of one of the largest, sexiest technology companies in the world at their sales kickoff 2 weeks ago. And they said, listen, 80% of our annual contract value that we have in our budget for this coming year is coming from existing customers. We want to renew them and we want to sell them more of our ecosystem. And so what they said was, these 4 things right here is 80% of our job this year. So pay attention to this guy. And I thought, well, that was a fine introduction. That was great. So when you think about it, 80% of the entire company's business is coming from these 4 moves. But what we know is the research says that literally 80% of companies spend 70+% of their budget over here. Part of that is because they didn't know there was a difference of what they needed to do over here. Otherwise, maybe they would spend more time over there. But there's just also some like all-consuming sort of lean in a company to this whole part of the business. But in reality, the majority of your business is coming from here. So finally, there's legitimate research and findings to help make sure you're doing this right. So let's talk about it. Let's go to the why stay model. And back to this visual, we built a model and said, hypothetically, instead of destroying or defeating status quo bias, let's go in and reinforce the 4 causes of status quo bias. So we took that visual that we drew for ourselves that I showed you and built a model. One that reinforced preference stability by documenting the current results impact outcomes that had been achieved so far in the relationship. And in our studies, in none of the studies did we say that 100% of goal had been reached. In fact, in our studies, on average, we said only 50% of your goal was reached. So we wanted to not make this renewal a slam dunk. We briefly reviewed the prior decision process. Here's 2 years ago when you made this decision to choose us, here's who you looked at, here's what the process was, here's all the people that were involved. Why? Because they might have forgot how diligent they were and frankly how hard it was. And not only did they forget, maybe some of the decision makers have changed and you want to kind of transfer ownership. So here you want to anchor them in that positive momentum that becomes very hard to undo. And you wanted to tether everybody in the room back to the previous decision and transfer some ownership. You then want to say companies who have changed at this stage of the game, in this sort of area, have potentially lost this kind of momentum, have put all these gains at risk. And in fact, not only are you putting the positive gains at risk, you're putting the investment at risk that you had made. And you remind them of the dollars and the time, right? And the sweat equity that had been put into and really are a sunk cost. They don't have to do that again. When might they have to do that again? If they change. And then and only then do you detail your competitive advances. Again, what we see in most renewals is that people want to open with what's new. And they use sort of that why change mentality because, hey, it's renewal. They know us pretty well. We're like an old shoe. We gotta sexy this up a little bit. We gotta make this exciting. We gotta let them know we are really out there doing some stuff, and aren't they glad they're working with us? So we put this on the back end because in the spirit of helping reinforce status quo bias, what we said is people are loath to change to get more or less the same. So the idea was, let's detail our advances as keeping them competitive. They aren't falling behind. Don't worry. Whatever you might have heard from analysts, whatever you might have heard at trade shows or from our competitors, we got you covered. All right. So what we did then is we went head to head. We created a simulation where we presented a 2-year renewal contract. We recruited people who fit a B2B buying profile. We put them in a simulation and said, your vendor's coming back 2 years later. They've accomplished about half the goals you were hoping at half the rate you were hoping, but you've made some progress. And they're coming in to deliver the renewal message or pitch. Unbeknownst to them, part of the group listened to a pitch based on the why change model. The other part of the group heard the pitch based on the why stay model. Mind you, they did not hear both. They only heard one, so this was a conservative test. So one was all about the new, all about provoking and introducing fresh insights, told them about new needs, new research, and new capabilities that they wanted to bring to bear on the renewal. The other one walked them through a progression of, like we identified and talked about their new stuff on the back end. What happened? So in the study, what we found is that all the questions that we ask around how satisfied are you with your current vendor? How satisfied are you with this presentation? How favorable are you in terms of your disposition towards your current vendor after you heard this pitch? We had them rank it on a scale of 1 to 9 on all these questions, what their intensity level was. And there was a 10% difference. The people who heard the why stay story felt more favorable, more satisfied, more committed to their current vendor by a 10% difference versus those who heard the why change story. In other words, that provocative, insight-driven pitch. It, in fact, had the opposite of intended effect, which is, gee, we hope you're excited to work with us because we're bringing you all this new stuff. Well, they were less favorably disposed towards you when you told them that story. What's ironic is if you maybe asked them, hey, what story do you want us to bring? They might have said, hey, tell us about all your new stuff. This is the thing this is dangerous because your customer will probably tell you, tell us about all your new stuff, but they will not actually react to it very well. There's something scientists call declared versus revealed preference. This is the reason we run simulations, not surveys. Customers will declare, yeah, tell us about all your new stuff. But when we did that, their scores were 10% lower in terms of favorability ratings. They were 13% higher in terms of intention to renew for the why stay model, which means they were 13% lower in terms of likelihood and intention to renew. And then when we asked them about your likelihood of switching, likelihood of entertaining competitors, willingness to look at discounts from competitive sources, they were 11% less likely to switch or engage in competitive conversations when the why stay method was used. Again, I think your customers would want to tell you, hey, I want to hear all about your new stuff. Why don't you, bring that to bear? But when actually put in the simulation, their revealed responses in a simulation were the exact opposite of that. So in some ways, the science of simulation versus the pseudoscience of surveys is at work here. So Nick, I'm going to pause there for a second. I'm going to go back to the model for folks. Anything you want to sort of say about this in terms of the science behind it and what we observed?
Yeah, I think I would reinforce the idea of the status quo bias is really driving a lot of this, but also this idea that I think one of the things you don't want to do in a situation of renewal is you don't really want to make people think about going through that whole decision process again. And I think one of the things we agreed on or we thought about when we talked about these results was that the more we talk about new stuff, the more we get people to think, well, maybe I should look at all of the other stuff that's out there. And you really don't want people to do that. You want them to feel that the safe option is to stay where they are. As I said, status quo bias is super powerful. And we really don't want to open up the idea that, hey, they better get outside the cave because maybe there's a whole bunch of new stuff outside the cave. That's kind of how I like to explain this issue. I'm not sure if that's similar to how you explain it, Tim.
Yeah, I think it was you who told us that the idea here is we said psychologically, what's going on when you go to renewal with a why change challenging provocation model? You said people have this sense of, okay, if I've got to change that much, with my incumbent, and I got to change that much anyways, why should I assume my incumbent can do this best? Why not, then we should invite in all the other players and see what they have to say about this because I'm going to have to change anyways. And so the risk is you just created so much of a sense of things are going to have to change. They're going to be so new and different is that they go, all right, might as well round up the usual suspects and run this through the process again because of what I just heard. So the idea here is that, yes, you may have some new stuff over here on the right, but you want people to see that as an evolution, as a incremental, ongoing, right, sort of more guaranteed future impact, not some huge disruption, because they, by the scores that we saw, were really disrupted and less favorable for it and more willing to consider switching. Just the exact opposite of what you were hoping to have happen. So let's go on to why pay more, because when we did the why stay study, everybody said, yeah, but when we do renewals, we're usually trying to grab back some margin because we undersold it at the beginning and we overserved it during the first 2 years. So the second contract's where we're going to make our money. So we went back out and we basically brought some more science to bear. So in addition to status quo bias, we thought about a concept called the anchoring effect. So the idea was we went back and ran the same renewal study, but with a different group of people this time. And in some of the cases, we said, hey, here's the renewal story. And in the next 2 years, you got to pay us 4% more. In some of the other tests, we said, hey, it's an 8% increase for the next 2-year contract. But because you're a loyal customer, we're only going to charge you 4%. The other new customers, they got to pay the higher price for these increase in services. We're going to give you a loyalty discount. In fact, we used what's called anchoring with justification. So what we did is we built a test and we said, maybe just maybe, the why change model will win when you're asking for more money because they're going to want to know they're getting a bunch of new stuff. Or maybe the price increase will win because they believe everything's going in the right direction, and some of your stuff here at the end, well, that's worth a little extra. And by the way, I don't have to pay that as much as the new people. So there were 4 test conditions. In one test condition, it was a straight 4%, and the other was 8% with a discount to 4%. So there was 2 versions of why change. So there were 2 audiences we tested there. And then there were 2 versions of why stay with a straight 4% and an anchored high justified discount. So if you're with me, 1, 2, 3, 4 test conditions. So we recruited even more people and we put them into separate test conditions. And what won? Turned out that the why pay more model was the why stay with an anchor. And I'll show you here in a second. But just to give you a sense, in second place was why change with an anchor. But look at the difference. Now, instead of 10% higher favorability, the why stay with an anchored price increase on the back end doubled the favorability rating. People were more favorably disposed to your renewal with a price increase, twice as much now with a price increase attached to it when you use the why stay model. It moved from 13 to 16% in terms of likelihood of renewal, and from 11% to 16% in terms of less likely to switch. In fact, what we saw when you had a price increase is not the time to go with why change. It doesn't help. In fact, it only makes matters worse. So again, our intuition might say, gee, if we're going to go in with a price increase, we better zap them with a bunch of new. And it turns out, no, don't do it at renewal, and don't do it at renewal with a price increase. Nick, any thoughts on that? I'll show the model here. Basically, it was the why stay story, as we said, with the anchored 8%, but not for you. You get 4% because you're a loyal customer. Congratulations and thanks for doing business, and please sign this 2-year extension. Thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I would say, again, we're playing on a really strong psychological effect called anchoring. Again, it's one of the very common things that you see, and in fact, business and marketing and pricing models use this all the time. Anytime you ever click on Amazon's daily deals, you're seeing an anchoring based pricing model, because I mean, one of the classic things, I was just doing it today, you always see these electric toothbrushes. I don't know why, but they're always full price $250, but you can get it for $125 today on a daily deal. And that's a great example of an anchoring price strategy. So we're much more willing to pay when we think we could have paid more. Sales, discounts, many businesses' entire model is based on anchoring. And I've studied it, and I've done research on lots of different contexts of pricing, and anchoring almost always influences people to pay more than they would have paid if you didn't include the anchor. So again, it's one of those things that we're playing off a really strongly ingrained psychological trait of human decision making.
I think some people bristle at these concepts in B2B, thinking for some reason no longer do we use our human brains, we trade them in for robot brains or something. But it turns out, even though you might think like anchoring with a price justification, a decrease with a justification is cheesy, but it still works. All right, so looking at the time, we did why stay, renewals, why stay with a price increase. Let's talk about upgrades. This is how this always works. People are like, okay, so here's my problem. I have everybody on my old version 2.0, and we're already developing on 10.0. I got to migrate our customers. Or we've gotten all this on-prem, and I've got to move them to the cloud. Or they've bought our platform, but I want to sell our ancillary adjacent services. Or we have a company, and we've acquired a bunch of other companies, and we want to cross-sell. Whatever it is, it's about getting an existing customer to do more. So we had a bit of I'll call it a new hypothesis that possibly, just possibly, the why evolve message should be a hybrid of some of the why stay and some of the why change. And what we did is construct a hybrid. Real quickly, I'll show you that we believe that the main thing we didn't want to lose in the incumbent advantage was Here's what we've done to date. We've shown that we can work in your company successfully, accomplish some of your goals, create some real meaningful, tangible impact. Because we're working inside of your company very well, we see what you're doing and what's going on, but we work in a bunch of companies just like you, so we can highlight some evolving pressures from this unique internal, external vantage point that the outside competitor doesn't have. And notice it's evolving pressures, not surprising, disruptive, didn't see this coming pressure. Then, because you have this unique position where you have an internal perspective and an external, and you've partnered and produced results, you can share some quote unquote hard truths. Here are some potential missed opportunities we see from this distinct vantage point as a trusted partner, as well as an outside expert. And here's the risk of not making a change. Here's the upside of making the change. Let's discuss. And so the idea is it's deeply rooted in the partnership and the business impact that's been positive. And because we've learned and invested all this time and effort with you and you with us, we can have this open conversation about things we're observing inside your company and compare those in a way that most companies really appreciate. Like, they love to be voyeurs of other companies. And you say, and here's how you stack up to the others we see. And so as a result, here's the hard truths in your company about what might be taking place and what you might need to do. And then we kind of give them an equation, which way you're going to go. So what we did is we said, okay, maybe in a cloud migration, upsell, cross-sell, upgrade moment, maybe then the why change model will win. Because in effect, if you're selling to a new business unit, which was another thing we tested, or you're trying to sell them a new thing, it's new. So you should convince them to change because they're doing that thing somehow today, not with you. And then we thought, well, maybe we should just bake it into the why stay model, right? And bake it into the discussion here. Or maybe there's this hybrid. What did we discover? What we discovered is that it was a battle between these two. That in fact, the only question that this model won on in the upgrade discussion that we're about to talk about was when we asked the question, how likely are you to just stick with what you're currently doing? And lo and behold, the why stay model won. I would say that's good news. It's good news for renewals and renewals with price increases. Not good news if you're trying to upsell your customer. So don't use this in the upsell. This is strictly a renewal and renewal with price increase model. Very important for those of you who got to get that job done. But if you're in the business of trying to upsell and upgrade them, this is where the real battle was. But look at the results. That in fact, people believe that the why evolve hybrid that incorporated some of the why stay with some of the emotional triggers of why change was a 10% more convincing case than the straight why change model. So when you're trying to get somebody to change and you can bump that lever up by 10% in terms of their belief that they might have to make this change, and 13% in their willingness to make that upgrade or buy that add-on sale, or 16% more likely to make the purchase when we ask questions like, how likely are you to bring others into this decision? How likely are you to tell your colleagues? How willing are you to convene and look to procure budget sort of thing? So we ask intentional type questions that would give us the indication of likelihood to purchase. These are meaningful numbers that in fact, why change would lower the convincing case by 10%, would make them 13% less likely or willing to upgrade and 16% less likely to purchase than a different approach. So Nick, as we look at this, it became very clear that there's real value to your incumbency in terms of them knowing that you have been successful and have a track record with them knowing that you see things inside their company and can compare it to other companies, them trusting and believing that what you're telling them, once you do hit sort of that emotional moment where you try to help them see the need to change, and then the value of you laying it out for them in terms of the risk of no change and the upside opportunity, it just leverages that partnership position in a unique way, but pricks the emotional triggers needed to get them to change. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, actually, this was kind of a challenging one, I think, to work out on what basis could we design something that would work? So the way I look at this is it's harnessing risk aversion, definitely. I think you're kind of highlighting the risks of staying in the same place, for example, in this way, but you have to be a little careful with that. But it's what I call risk aversion plus, because what you're doing here is moving into now using what I would say is more of a social psychology approach. So what we're doing here is we're making relationship investments, and I've been researching in this kind of area for a long time now, 10 to 15 years, and consistently what I find is that customers would like salespeople to act as industry experts and consultants. That's one of the few things that customers think salespeople can do well. And this is a great way of doing that. This is when what you're doing by sharing what we call hard truths is you're making investments in a relationship, because what you're doing is putting yourself out there as a vendor and saying, we're going to tell you something you might not want to hear. And in doing that, you sort of place yourself in a vulnerable position, and that is a relationship investment, and it tends to lead to reciprocation. And that's one of the great things if you read the work of Bob Cialdini in what's he called, Persuasion, and he has a great book called Persuasion, and he talks about the power of reciprocation. And that's really what I call, well, it's not what I call, but it's what social psychologists call social exchange. So we exchange some sort of resource and we get something back. And the power of reciprocating is incredibly influential on people's decisions. And I think that's one of the ways that this model works in what is a very difficult situation, somewhere between a change and a stay. And that's how I explain it anyway.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I think when folks look at this model right here, I will tell you early on now in our experiences, this has become the popular model because this is what everybody's trying to do every day. Like renewals are absolutely essential, but more or less, everybody's got a land and expand strategy. And what you're looking at right here is something that's become very popular in account management, CSM world, and customer marketing, which is the QBR, right? The quarterly business review or executive business review. What should that agenda look like? What order should that agenda be in? So when you are in the comfortable confines of a contract, you want to begin introducing some of these other ideas, and you have an opportunity to do that within the partnership, right? There's a relationship investment, like Nick said, and what you're trying to establish is you're being really not only hard truths is kind of like self-assessing and client assessing. So you're kind of in this together. Like here's some gaps yet, and here's what could be done. And so it really is an opportunity. When people say we want to be trusted advisors, I go, yeah, you can't be that by just launching why change grenades into the customer. You share the risk here. It's risk aversion, but you're now part of the risk. And the relationship investment is solidified on the front end, and then you create that moment of reciprocity on the other side. It was a subtle, somewhat nuanced model, but the more we've done it, the more we've been able to prove this out with some of the controlled field trials where we're working with companies who have like aftermarket sales and they're going in and trying to do add-on sales. We've been seeing this model work. We've been working with companies to build their QBRs around this agenda, and they've reported much more favorable motion and movement towards bigger deals when renewals come. So we offer this as something to think about both in quarterly business reviews and upsell marketing, as well as just if you think if you're a marketer and you're launching a new product, but for your existing customers, it's going to be an add-on. Your message should look more like this than, wow, this new thing is super sexy. And we see this like in cloud migration all the time. Everybody's like, cloud, 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 cloud. The reality is if you're talking to people who haven't bought from you, you're trying to defeat status quo bias, you might be trying to beat an on-prem vendor. But if you are the on-prem vendor, you're going to want to talk about that more like this. And so we've been building cloud migration messages for companies, upgrades from 2.0 to 10.0, and all kinds of things. So this is a highly flexible, but super powerful and slightly nuanced. So it's something to consider and internalize and work with. So we got just a little bit of time left, Nick. We got 8 minutes left, and here's what I'm going to say. There's questions coming in. Nick and I will answer all those in a follow-up email to you. We got this exciting apology research. This is funny because Nick and I gave a speech in the Netherlands, and we introduced why stay, why evolve, and why pay more. And all of them, one thing they had in common was documenting your current positive relationship. Well, this client of ours was a telecommunications company, and they came up to us afterward and they said, that's all really good, but what if your clients don't like you? What if you're struggling? What if there's a kind of bad relationship going on? And I said, tongue in cheek, I said, that shouldn't matter. It's okay. Nobody likes their telecom provider, so you're fine. They didn't think that was a solid enough answer or a strategic answer, nor did they think it was funny. And we embarked on this idea of apology science. So quickly, with the time we have left, the fourth must-win conversation after renewals, upsells, price increases is apologies. And what we were able to find is, lo and behold, just like status quo bias, there are decades of academic apology articles published out there, dozens of them. But what we discovered is like there's components of a good apology, but nobody had ever studied whether there was a better order to these. So what we decided to do is we took each of the components of the apology, we built a simulation around a piece of software failing dramatically and causing much heartache at these customers, and not just heartache for the owner of the software, but their executive team and their constituents. And we wrote copy blocks. And what we then did is we wrote the apology for each component. We then put test conditions together where we did different orders. So think of it this way, same words, just a different order. So I want you to look at these here. And what we did is we chose these first four conditions were the likely winners. Based on our research and reviewing these dozens of articles, we're like, these should be the likely, if there's going to be an order and if the order matters, these might be them. The fifth one was here because we said, sometimes in B2B, people believe there's no room for emotion. So we created one apology that took all the fluffy stuff out. But I want you to look at this right now. If you think about an apology and you think about like the order you want it to go in, like the first thing you want to hear, the second thing you want to hear, third, etc., and how you would want people to close out their apology. I want you to take a moment right now, and I want you to take your comment bar, and I want you to put the test condition number you think looks like it should be the right order. So I'm gonna have Jamie give me call this out in real time. So in the box, put 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And as you look at these, which one do you think, if you took the story, now remember, same words, we just cut and paste them in different orders. And if order matters, which of these orders to you looks like the one that should have elicited the most favorable response? Jamie, do we have folks weighing in on this?
Yeah, we got a ton of you guys coming in right now. This is awesome. I'm seeing majority here, Tim, are saying 4, and we got probably 1 is the next in line.
All right.
4
so
and then 1.
Number 1 by a majority of, is it 50%, 60, 70%? What is it looking like?
Yeah, there's probably more 1s coming in right now. So I'd probably say 2/3 are 1s, and then the scramblings of the other ones.
Oh, all right. So number 1 you're saying is winning?
Yeah, number 1 and number 4, first
Okay.
and second.
All right. So in here we have either number 1 or number 4. I want you to remember that as we now go to look at some results. First, we went and looked and said, is there anything in B2B about this? And some of the academic research was in B2B. A lot of it was in B2C during the Bill Clinton era. But anyways, a lot of celebrities and politicians. And we found this from HubSpot. And HubSpot said, here's how to write a good apology letter. Because what you want is to document and memorialize your apology, because after the problem, 2 years later at renewal, if you don't document what you did, they might only remember the problem, right? And so there's something that's really important here that the industry calls the service recovery paradox. And that is, if you did a deal here over time, if this is their sort of favorability or loyalty and this is time, people's perceptions of you will be nice and they will grow. But if you have a service problem, they dip. But if you recover well, the service recovery paradox says you can actually increase their favorability and loyalty. It's literally called service recovery paradox. It's called a paradox for the very reason that you actually get a better reaction if you effectively apologize, fix the problem, and document a good apology. So this is important stuff for companies. If you want to figure out how to create more loyalty after a service problem, don't panic. There's an opportunity here. So what we argued was the HubSpot example was more like number 4, and lots of you picked number 4 as well. And then we did some studies around that. We put people in the different test conditions. They only read one apology, and it was an apology after a fix on a very, anger-inducing problem. And we said, okay, what's your willingness to continue buying from this vendor after hearing this message, or willingness to buy more from this vendor after hearing this message? Turned out, and I don't know how many of you picked number 3, but yay you, by a material margin, the number 3, and I'll show it to you in a second, was higher than number 4, number 1, even though they came in second and third. What you notice is there's volatility. All of a sudden, number 1 drops a little, number 4 is here, but the bottom line is, like, there's no clear second place, but there is a clear winner in terms of who would buy again. And scientists would say this is a material contrast effect. If you could get a 10+% lift on their willingness to buy more after an apology versus another way of doing it. Now remember, the words were the same, the order was different. This is the winner. Offer of repair, acknowledge responsibility, declare your repentance, explain and express regret. Number 4 opened with expressing regret, and number 1 acknowledging responsibility. I can see why we all picked that. It seems right in a formal apology to acknowledge responsibility first or say you're sorry. But it turns out, we think psychologically, that people can't even hear that until they essentially know, what did you do to fix it, and how did you restore my perceived lost value? This is 2 components. How did you fix it, and what did you do to restore value? Because the perception is we lost value, it was unfair, and it's called justice theory. And they can't hear the rest of what you have to say until they know this has happened. And you might say, well, what about number 2? It doesn't seem to be doing very well, and it opened the same. Well, I would tell you to look at the closings. The people remember firsts and lasts. And if you open and help them see that you restored the value, and you close by how sorry you are, as opposed to closing with, and here's all the things that went wrong, that's a bad note to leave them on. So we ask them more questions, not just willingness to buy more and loyalty. We ask advocacy questions, willingness to recommend and be a reference. Number 3 again. This time, number 4 people, you guys are starting to really tank. And I'm going to give you a quick story. We were at Gartner telling this story, and when I asked that audience to pick a winner, 80% of the people in the room, now this is sales leaders at the CSO conference at Gartner, picked number 4. And so if I would have left Gartner and said a survey of really smart people at a really smart conference said that this is the order you should apologize, or HubSpot said this is the order you should apologize, you would have actually been leading everybody astray. Declared preference surveys are not as good as revealed preference simulations, and this is a great example of it. The things you feel might be right don't have the same impact. When we ask about confidence levels, look what we saw is number 3. Again, here, Nick, I guess what I'd ask you is, what we saw was there were 5 test conditions, and what you look for in 5 test conditions, because that's a lot, is, I think you've told me, you look for a consistent winner and you look for a clear winner. And again, those folks at the Gartner conference and those folks who follow HubSpot's recommendations literally bottomed out here. You guys who picked number 1, not bad, but do you want to take that chance and stick with number 1, or do you maybe want to go with a clear winner every time? So Nick, talk to us about these results a little bit. Oh, Nick, you're on mute. I think we might have lost some.
Sorry,
Jamie.
Oh,
there
I'm
you
still
are.
here, sorry.
Okay.
It's this headset. Anyway, sorry. I agree particularly with the recency effect that you explained. I think that is the key thing, is what you say first and what you say last, very much. And I think if you look at the important thing you say first is not to say sorry. In this sort of situation, I think they kind of take that as a given. right? So what you want to do is bring in what you're going to do about it first and foremost, because what you haven't done is this is not a kind of soft problem, like you didn't turn up to dinner or something. This is something where people have lost money. So the first thing they want to know is, how are you going to solve that problem? But at the same time, if you don't leave them with a positive feeling, that's one of the things they're going to remember about that conversation. So expression of regret is certainly something that they expect to hear. It's just that they kind of don't want to hear that first. So that's how I would look at it. And I think it is important, the thing that you said about the consistency of the winner. I mean, when you're testing 5 different things against each other, you do tend to get bouncing up and down. But what you're really looking for is one that consistently wins each time. So there's an incremental difference in all of the different things you're interested in, rather than, oh, this one is best here and this one is best there. And I think that does suggest that the apology order 3 is quite powerful. And I must admit, when we first looked into this, it was a surprise that nobody seemed to have worked out the ordering effect. I was quite surprised we couldn't just, I think I said to Tim, look, just give me a week and I'll find something in a book, but there really wasn't. So I think this is really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and it's a big part. I mean, like, this happens in every company, and it's what we've discovered is everybody takes kind of an ad hoc approach to this, and knowing that there is a better way to do this that will induce potentially the service recovery paradox, and you get higher loyalty, more advocacy, and higher degrees of confidence and satisfaction if you document your apology and then do it in the right order. That's, to me, an awesome win. And so, gang, the expansion sale is all about these 4 conversations: how to renew with a price increase, how to upsell, cross-sell, and migrate your customer, and how to apologize when that moment happens so that you keep and grow that business. And it's different. It's context matters. Don't approach existing customers the way you approach new logos. Acquisition does not equal expansion, and in fact, it will backfire. And I would tell you that context is more important than personas. Hear me now. Context, whether you're talking to a prospect or an existing customer, and how they will react, their context, is more powerful than personas. Because if you target a persona, let's say like a CIO, you want a message different if that's a prospective CIO versus an existing customer, using these frames we just told you about. Literally, your CIO message is now rendered completely generic. It's a prospect message or an existing customer message. It's a defeat status quo or defend status quo bias message. And so reality is that the design point of your message and your sales calls, pitches, presentations, your QBRs need to recognize the psychology of the moment and not even worry as much about, if at all, about the persona, because everybody in the room is living with the same psychology. Either they are a prospect and they need their status quo busted, or they are a customer and they need to see how they can grow and expand it with you. So with that, I'm looking at the time, Nick. It's 2:06. We went, my time 2:06. Wherever you are in the world, it's 6 minutes after the hour. We went a little long. I apologize. We will answer your questions. They're all important. You can see there's a lot of content here. So I'd encourage you, this link over here takes you to Amazon to get the book. We'd love for you to go out and get the book and hear the studies in detail, see practical examples, and hear it described in detail, both the frameworks on how to build the message and skills on how to tell the message. We also have added the expand value to our 3 value conversations are now 4 value conversations. So there's a free ebook for you there as well. Nick, thank you so much. Appreciate your insights as usual. Everybody who was here today, thanks for joining. Our goal was to spread the milk of human kindness, give you some insights here free today, and hopefully encourage you to take a deeper dive into this, and hopefully got you to see that context does matter. So when you're out there 80% of the time keeping and growing customers, you now have a strategic, tested, proven, scientific approach. Thanks again, Nick. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.